How are you supposed to properly mourn the father everyone called a traitor when the most feared alpha in the territories crashes the funeral, his predatory gaze cutting through the rain to pin you in place as if you were the only thing he came for? Chapter 1: A Grave of Whispers. Rain fell. Not a cleansing shower, but a cold, weeping sky that clung to Annie's skin and turned the fresh grave into a pit of sucking mud. Each drop was a tiny hammer against her thin black dress, a rhythm of misery that matched the hollow beat in her chest. The world had shrunk too. This square of broken earth and the headstone that bore her father's name, a name now synonymous with treason. She knelt, ignoring the chill seeping into her bones because what was one more discomfort in a life made of them? The scent of damp soil and lilies, cloying and sweet, filled her lungs. It smelled like the end of things. Then came the whispers. They slithered through the downpour like snakes in the grass, sharp and venomous. Worthless, just like him. The voice belonged to Elder Maeve, a woman whose smile had once been kind. Now, her face was a mask of pinched scorn. The Alpha should have exiled her years ago. A tainted bloodline, another voice added, heavy with disgust. Annie squeezed her eyes shut. The words weren't new. They were the stones that had built the walls of her world, the echoes that filled every silence. She'd learned to live with them, to wear their judgment like a shroud. Her only goal was to say her final goodbye, to carve out one last moment of peace for a man who had been her son, even when the rest of the world saw only his shadow. But peace was a currency she didn't possess. Each hushed syllable was a fresh cut, reminding her that she wasn't just grieving a father, she was inheriting his shame. And in this pack, shame was a life sentence. Chapter 2: The Ghost of a Promise. From that desolate place, a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision made her flinch. Annie's gaze lifted against her will, scanning the somber crowd huddled beneath black umbrellas. Her breath hitched. Cale. He stood near an ancient oak, his handsome face a carefully arranged sculpture of sympathy that didn't quite reach his eyes. The sight of him was a phantom pain, a wound that never truly closed. The funeral, the rain, the whispers, they all faded into a dull roar, replaced by the sharp, vivid memory of a summer festival 10 years ago. Fireflies had danced in the twilight air. Her heart, a foolish, fluttering bird in her chest, had finally found the courage to speak. He had laughed. It wasn't a kind sound. It was sharp, cruel, and meant for an audience. You, he'd scoffed, his voice loud enough for his friends to hear. The traitor's daughter? My mate? Don't be pathetic. Pathetic. The word had branded itself onto her soul. Now, seeing him watch her with that same calculated pity made something hot and acidic rise in her throat. He wasn't here to mourn. He was a spectator at her humiliation, perhaps reassuring himself of the good decision he'd made. A part of her, the small, feral thing that had survived all these years, wanted to scream at him. It wanted to show him the cold, hard rage that lived beneath her silent exterior. Instead, she broke the contact, her head bowing once more. Let him watch. Let them all watch. Her focus narrowed back to the slick, dark wood of the coffin being lowered into the earth. This was about her father. Nothing else mattered, no other ghost would haunt this final moment. Chapter 3: The Predator in the Storm. In the wake of that decision, a new kind of silence fell. It was different from the quiet lulls in conversation. This was a heavy, suffocating stillness that crushed the sound of the rain and stole the air from Annie's lungs. A primal instinct, long dormant, screamed at her. Danger. The hairs on her arms and the back of her neck rose. The pack members shifted, their murmurs dying in their throats. They turned as one, their collective fear a palpable wave. And then she smelled it. Ozone and ancient pine, power and dominance, a scent that spoke of a wolf so potent it commanded the very atmosphere. He strode through the gates as if he owned them. Alpha Lucian Drax. He wasn't just an alpha, he was a legend, a nightmare whispered to unruly pups. A king from a rival territory, known for his savagery and the trail of broken bodies he'd left in his wake. His black coat soaked up the gray light, and his presence was a physical force, a gravitational pull of violence and authority. Why was he here? What could he possibly want at the funeral of a disgraced beta from another pack? His golden eyes, glowing with an unnatural intensity, swept over the terrified crowd with dismissive arrogance. They saw everything and nothing. Until they found her. The world stopped. The rain, the whispers, the ache in her knees, all of it vanished. He locked onto her, and Annie felt it like a physical blow, a spear of heat through the icy misery. He wasn't looking at her with pity or scorn. It was something else entirely. Something raw. Possessive. In that gaze, she was not the worthless girl. She was the sole focus of a predator that had just found its prey. And he started to walk toward her. Chapter 4, The Alpha's Mark. His steps were silent, eating the muddy ground between them until he stood over her, a mountain of dark rage that blocked out the weeping sky. Lucian Drax didn't look at the grave. He didn't acknowledge the pack elders who now stood frozen, their earlier scorn replaced by pure, undiluted fear. His golden gaze devoured Annie, stripping away the layers of worthlessness and shame until she felt raw, exposed. She trembled, a leaf in a hurricane, expecting a final, killing blow. His scent, that intoxicating storm of pine and power, was overwhelming, a drug that both terrified and compelled her. He knelt, bringing them eye to eye. A low sound rumbled in his chest, a vibration she felt in her own bones, ancient and possessive. It was the sound of a beast recognizing its own. Then, a single word tore from his throat, a guttural growl that was not a request, but a statement of fact. Mine. The word shattered the world. It was impossible. A lie. A cruel trick of a universe that had only ever offered her pain. Before the shock could even register, before she could draw breath to deny it, chaos erupted. Shadows detached from the surrounding forest, moving with unnatural speed. Wolves. Not her pack, or his. Rogues, their eyes burning with feral red light, their snarls ripping through the funeral's somber air. They weren't here for a fight, they were here for a kill. And their snarling maws were aimed directly at her. A flash of claws, a scream, the idyllic nightmare of the claim was consumed by a very real one of blood and steel. Chapter 5, A Savage Shield. Terror was a claw in Annie's throat. A rogue, its fur matted with mud and malice, lunged for her. She threw her arms up in a useless gesture of defense, her life spooling out in one final, silent scream. But the blow never landed. A black-clad whirlwind intercepted the beast, a force of pure, unrestrained violence. Lucian. He moved not like a man, but like a shadow given fangs. There was no finesse, no warrior's grace. This was butchery. A hand, tipped with claws she hadn't seen before, tore through a rogue's throat. A sickening crack echoed as he snapped a limb. He spun, a blur of motion, gutting another attacker before it could even land. He was a monster. A beautiful, terrifying monster. The coppery tang of blood filled the air, thick and metallic, overpowering the scent of rain and earth. Annie, still huddled by the grave, watched the slaughter with wide, horrified eyes. He was drenched in gore, a creature born of primal rage. Yet, with every enemy he felled, he positioned himself in front of her. He became her shield. Her wall. A savage, living barrier between her and the death that had come calling. The contradiction ripped through her mind. This horrifying violence was being wielded for her. This creature of nightmare was her only salvation. The last rogue fell with a wet gurgle, its lifeblood staining the lilies on her father's grave. And in the ringing silence that followed, Lucien stood over the carnage, his chest heaving, his golden eyes burning with an untamed fire that promised he was far from finished. Chapter 6: The Unbreakable Chain. The world held its breath. Steam rose from the cooling bodies, mingling with the mist of the relentless rain. Lucien Drax stood in a circle of death he had created, his breathing harsh and ragged. The wildness of the fight still clung to him, a dangerous aura that kept everyone, his warriors and her pack, rooted to the spot. He was no longer just an alpha, he was a primal god of wrath. He slowly turned, his blood-splattered face a mask of cold fury. His gaze swept over the shocked faces of her pack, dismissing them as insects. He looked at his own grim-faced warriors. Finally, his burning, golden eyes landed on Annie, pinning her where she knelt. The fire in them banked, but the intensity remained, a heat that promised ownership. He had marked her with his scent, defended her with his body, and now, he would chain her with his words. His voice cut through the stunned silence, not a shout, but a low, unbreakable command that echoed with the full weight of his alpha power. It resonated in every wolf's soul. She is mine. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. It was not a plea. It was not a negotiation. It was a declaration of war on anyone who dared to think otherwise. He reached down, his large hand closing around her arm. His grip was not gentle. It was a manacle of warm flesh and unyielding strength, pulling her to her feet and tucking her against his side. The whispers about her father's treason were forgotten, replaced by a new, more terrifying reality. She was no longer the worthless girl. She was the possession of Lucien Drax. And she had no idea if that was a rescue or a death sentence. Chapter 7: The Den of Wolves. The journey was a silent, rain-lashed blur. When they finally arrived, it wasn't to a pack village, but a fortress. Lucien's home was a compound of dark stone and sharp angles, a place built for war, not comfort, nestled against a formidable mountain. It felt less like a den and more like a cage. As he pulled her from the vehicle, his grip still an iron brand on her arm, she felt hundreds of eyes on her. His pack members lined the entrance hall, their faces hard, their stances hostile. There was no curiosity here, only contempt. The whispers were gone, replaced by a wall of menacing silence that was somehow worse. She was the enemy. The traitor's daughter. A spoil of a war they hadn't asked for. Lucien ignored them all, dragging her up a winding staircase and shoving her into a room. It was beautiful, a shock of unexpected luxury. A massive bed with furs, a crackling fireplace, a balcony that overlooked the storm-tossed forest. The place was fit for a queen, but the door closing behind her with a heavy, definitive thud sounded just like a cell. She was a prisoner, adorned in finery. A prized possession to be locked away. She walked to the vast window, pressing her hand against the cold glass. Below, wolves trained in the muddy courtyard, their movements sleek and deadly. They were his. This was his world. And in this brutal, unwelcoming kingdom, she was more alone than she had ever been in her life. This was not a rescue. This was a different kind of execution. Chapter 8, Rules of the Beast. Hours later, a silent guard came for her. He led her not to a dining hall, but to an office that seemed carved from the mountain itself. The room was Spartan, dominated by a massive oak desk and the alpha who sat behind it. Lucien looked different here, away from the rain and blood. He seemed larger, his power a contained, simmering force that made the very air in the room feel thin. He didn't rise. He simply watched her approach, his golden eyes clinical, cold. All the feral heat from the funeral was gone, replaced by a wall of sheer ice. The silence stretched, a tactic meant to unnerve her. It worked. She stood before his desk, feeling small and utterly insignificant. "You will remain in your room," he began, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the floorboards. "You will be fed. You will be protected. You will not speak to anyone." Each command was a stone dropped into the quiet, a new bar on her cage. The coldness was a slap, a dismissal so profound it stole her breath. What had that moment at the grave meant? That single, guttural word, mine, that had rewritten her existence? "Why?" she whispered, the question escaping before she could stop it. "Why did you bring me here?" He stood then, the movement fluid and predatory. He prowled around the desk until he was inches from her, the heat from his body a terrifying promise of the beast beneath the surface. His gaze was dark, tormented. "Because my wolf claimed you," he snarled, the words a confession and a curse. "And that is a problem you cannot begin to comprehend. Stay away from me, little one, it's for your own safety." Chapter 9, The Serpent's Kiss. Dismissed like a servant, Annie returned to the gilded cage of her room, his warning echoing in her mind. "For your own safety." It felt like a threat. An hour later, a soft knock came. A young woman entered with a tray, a gentle, reassuring smile on her face. Annie recognized her, one of the few from her old pack who had never openly sneered. The sight of a familiar face was a balm, a tiny drop of comfort in an ocean of hostility. The woman set down a steaming cup of herbal tea. "To calm your nerves, Luna," she murmured, her eyes kind. Grateful for the gesture, Annie took the cup. The warmth seeped into her cold hands. She took a sip. Bitterness exploded on her tongue. Not herbs, almonds. Poison. A fire ignited in her stomach, a vicious cramp that made her gasp and drop the porcelain cup. It shattered on the stone floor. Through a wave of dizziness, she saw the woman's kind smile twist into a triumphant sneer. The assassin lunged, a silver dagger appearing in her hand. But before she could take a single step, the door to the room exploded inward. A black streak of pure fury slammed into the attacker, a snarl ripping through the air that was more beast than man. It was Lucien. He dispatched the woman with one brutal, efficient movement. Then he turned. For a split second, as his gaze fell on Annie choking on the floor, his golden eyes bled into molten red. The monster she had feared was there, its killing rage now focused entirely on her. He took a step, and then he froze, the color receding as a look of sheer horror washed over his own face. His warning wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Chapter 10, A Poisoned Honey. Lucien had confined her to her chambers after the assassination attempt, a gilded cage now secured with armed guards. Days bled into a monotonous gray, a quiet that was a different kind of torture. That fragile peace shattered with the announcement of a diplomatic envoy from her old pack. Her heart seized when she saw him. Cale. He strode into the tense atmosphere of Lucien's fortress, looking polished and out of place, his smile as smooth and practiced as ever. Under the guise of checking on her welfare, he cornered her in the library, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur. "Annie, you look terrified," he whispered, his eyes full of a carefully crafted concern that made her skin crawl. "This is a prison. You know Drax's reputation, he's a monster. He doesn't want you, he wants your father's old territory, and claiming you is the easiest way to get it." Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to hit the very center of her deepest fears. The old pain of his rejection warred with the new doubt he was sowing. Was this possessive nightmare just a political power play? He leaned closer, his scent of sandalwood and lies filling her space. "I can help you," he murmured, his hand briefly touching her arm. The contact felt like a spider's touch. "There are those of us who are still loyal to your father's memory. We can get you out of here, away from him." He left her standing amidst the towering shelves of books, his offer hanging in the air like poison smoke. She didn't trust him. Not for a second. But his words had found their mark, sinking into the cracks of her resolve and leaving her to wonder what terrible truth was worse, his lie, or the possibility that he was right. Chapter 11, The Anchor's Blood. The doubt Cale planted was a bitter seed. Desperate for something real, for a connection to the man her father had been, Annie turned to the small, battered chest that held his few remaining possessions. She ran her fingers over the familiar carvings, seeking a comfort that wasn't there. As she pressed down on a knot of wood, a soft click echoed in the silent room. A section of the floor popped up. It was a false bottom. Her breath caught. Beneath it, wrapped in oilskin, lay 3 leather-bound journals. Her father's journals. With trembling hands, she opened the first one. His familiar, steady script filled the pages, a voice from the grave. He wrote not of treason, but of protection. He spoke of their family line, a lineage that carried not a taint, but a sacred, dangerous gift. He detailed a genetic anomaly, a quirk of blood so rare it was thought to be a myth. Their bloodline possessed the unique ability to soothe the most violent of wolves, to anchor a feral spirit, to pull a beast back from the brink of madness. He had faked his disgrace, sacrificed his own name, and accepted the title of traitor for one reason. Only to hide her. To keep her from being discovered and turned into a living weapon, a prize for alphas seeking to control the uncontrollable. She dropped the journal, the pages fluttering. The world tilted, her entire identity shattering and reforming in an instant. All the whispers of Worthless were a lie. She wasn't a curse on her family name. She was the key. Chapter 12, A Hunger Unchained. That night, a violent storm broke over the fortress, mirroring the tempest in Annie's soul. Thunder cracked, and the wind howled like a tortured wolf. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to agitate something within the stone walls, and within its master. Lucien appeared at her door. His eyes wild, his energy a crackling, dangerous thing. He'd heard about Cale's visit, and his questions were sharp, accusatory. The argument escalated, his voice rising to a snarl, his control visibly fraying with each clap of thunder. He backed her against the wall, his powerful body caging her in, the scent of his rage and the storm filling her lungs. "You are mine," he growled, his face inches from hers. "No one else's." And then something broke behind his eyes. The gold was consumed by a black, hungry void. The man was gone, only the beast remained. It was a terrifying, beautiful thing, raw and untamed. He lowered his head, his hot breath ghosting across her neck as he inhaled her scent. She was frozen, a paralyzing mix of terror and a deep, primal pull that shocked her. His fangs, sharp and white, grazed the sensitive skin over her pulse point. He was going to mark her. To claim her by force. Panic, sharp and absolute, finally broke through her paralysis. "Lucien!" His name was a choked scream. It cut through his frenzy like a physical blow. He froze, the fangs retracting. The feral hunger in his eyes receded, replaced by a wave of pure, undiluted horror as he stared at her, and at what he had almost done. Chapter 13, A Reckless Offer. The air in the room was thick with the ghost of his violence. Lucien stood frozen, his chest heaving, the horror in his eyes a raw, human thing that was more terrifying than the beast had been. He looked at the faint red marks on her neck where his teeth had grazed her, and a shudder racked his powerful frame. He had almost broken her. He had almost become the monster he fought so hard to contain. Seeing his agony, a reckless, desperate courage bloomed in Annie's chest. This agonizing dance between his beast and his control had to end. She would not be a passive victim in his war with himself. She snatched the journal from her bed, her knuckles white. "I know what I am," she said, her voice shaking but clear. She thrust the book at him. "I know why your wolf wants me. It isn't some fated bond, is it? It's a sickness, and it thinks I'm the cure." He flinched as if her words were a physical blow, his eyes darting from the journal to her face. A storm of fury and terror brewed in his expression. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't lie to me," she cried, taking a bold step forward. "My father died to hide the secret. I won't let his sacrifice be for nothing. If my blood can help you, if it can stop that from happening." Again, she trailed off, gesturing to her neck. "Then use it." His answering snarl was filled with a desperate, savage pride. "Never," he growled, his voice a blade of ice. "I will not be leashed, not even to be saved." He turned his back on her, on the truth in her hands, and stalked from the room, leaving her alone with her useless, powerful blood. Chapter 14, A Pound of Flesh. A week of tense, suffocating silence passed. Lucien avoided her entirely, but his guards were a constant, suffocating presence. Then, a formal summons arrived. It was from her old pack. They offered a truce, a discussion to formally accept Lucien's claim and ensure peace. Hope, that foolish, stubborn weed, sprouted in Annie's heart. Perhaps this was a chance to mend things, to find a place that wasn't a battleground. Lucien, his face an unreadable mask of stone, agreed to the meeting at a neutral border. It was a trap. The moment she stepped into the clearing, her pack's guards seized her, binding her wrists with silver-laced rope that burned her skin. They were trading her like livestock. An alpha from a southern pack, a cruel-faced wolf with a sneer, looked her over and tossed a pouch of gold to her pack's acting leader. The betrayal was so absolute, so dehumanizing, it left her hollow. She was nothing to them but a chit to be bartered. But just as the rival alpha reached for her, a roar of pure, undiluted fury ripped through the forest. Lucien exploded from the tree line, a vengeful god at the head of a war party. His warriors fell upon her. Pack's guards, a whirlwind of black fur and red claws. There was no mercy. Lucien himself tore a path straight to the southern alpha, his eyes glowing with murderous intent. This wasn't a skirmish, it was an eradication. And amidst the bloody chaos, Annie saw the architect of her sale, a familiar, trusted face, half hidden behind a tree, his eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. Chapter 15, The Architect of Ruin. The ride back to the fortress was a grim, silent affair, the air thick with the metallic scent of blood. And the grim finality of what had been done. Annie sat wrapped in a cloak, the image of the man from the clearing burned into her mind. It wasn't just a random pack elder who had sold her. It was someone specific. Someone who had broken more than just her trust. As soon as they were back within the cold stone walls of his office, she spoke, her voice flat with a chilling certainty. It was Theron. Lucien, who had been pacing like a caged storm, froze. He turned to her, his golden eyes narrowed to slits. Elder Theron? Your father's confidant? The one who gave the eulogy? The same one, she confirmed, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. He was my father's shadow. He knew everything. He must have known about my bloodline. He watched me my whole life, letting me believe I was worthless. Lucien's face went pale, a terrible, dawning understanding in his eyes. He stared at her, his voice barely a whisper. My brother, before he led the rebellion that got him killed, he became unstable, volatile. Theron was the one who acted as an emissary between our packs back then. He was the one who whispered in my father's ear that my brother was too far gone, that he had to be put down. The air crackled with their shared realization. This was not a series of unfortunate tragedies. It was a single, long thread of manipulation. Their families, their pain, their losses, all of it. Orchestrated by one man. They were not enemies thrown together by fate. They were survivors of the same, hidden war. Chapter 16, The Poison of Politics. The alliance forged in the fire of Theron's betrayal was a fragile thing. In the days that followed, the fortress became a pressure cooker. Theron's influence, it turned out, was a web with threads leading deep into Lucien's own council. Word of the bloody spectacle at the border had spread, twisted into a new narrative. Lucien was no longer seen as a protector, but as an unstable alpha, his judgment compromised by a reckless obsession with a traitor's daughter. Annie felt the shift in the very stones of the place. The council meetings became closed-door shouting matches. Guards who had once shown her grudging respect now looked at her with open hostility. She was the disease weakening their pack from the inside, the poison that was killing their alpha's reign. Lucien fought it. He met every challenge with cold fury, his authority a weapon he wielded against the rising tide of dissent. But Annie saw the cost. She saw the exhaustion shadowing his eyes, the way his control seemed stretched thinner each day, the beast closer to the surface than ever. Every hostile glare she received was a blow against him. Every whispered argument in the halls was a crack in his foundation. She had brought this turmoil to his door. Her father's tainted legacy, the power in her blood, her very existence, it was all a curse. She had escaped the pack that called her worthless only to become the anchor that was dragging this one, and the man who claimed her, into a watery grave. The guilt was a physical weight, a stone in her gut that grew heavier with every passing hour. Chapter 17, A Noble Suicide. Sleep offered no escape. Annie found herself wandering the cold, moonlit halls of the fortress. Late one night, a ghost drawn to the source of her torment. A sliver of light shone from beneath the door of Lucien's study. She paused, her hand hovering over the handle, when she heard his voice. It was not the commanding growl of an alpha, but the broken whisper of a man. He was speaking to the darkness, to the moon, to anyone but her. I can't, the words were choked, raw with a pain that lanced through her heart. I can feel it clawing at the cage. It wants her. But it wants to break her, to own her so completely she no longer exists. I would rather die than let it touch her again. A sob caught in her throat. He wasn't fighting his council for power. He wasn't fighting Theron for revenge. He was fighting himself, for her. The beast that lived inside him saw her not as a mate to be cherished, but as a thing to be conquered, and the battle was tearing him apart. And she was the cause. Her proximity, the unresolved bond, the very anchor in her blood, it was all a constant torment, pushing him closer to the edge he feared most. In that moment of terrible clarity, a cold, devastating resolve settled over her. Love, she realized, was not about holding on. It was about letting go. She could not be his cure if she was also his disease. She would not be the reason he became the monster he so desperately feared. She would remove the temptation. She would sever the chain. She would perform the one act that would surely save him, even if it destroyed her. Chapter 18, The Sound of a Soul Breaking. The next day, she demanded a formal assembly in the Great Hall. Her request, delivered with a chilling, unnatural calm, was met with confusion, but Lucien, his eyes shadowed with wary concern, granted it. She stood in the center of the vast, cold room, the pack elders and warriors forming a silent circle around her. She found Lucien's gaze, ignoring the flicker of hope and fear. She saw there. She had to do this for him. She took a deep breath, the words she had practiced all night feeling like ashen glass in her mouth. I, Annalise Vale, she began, her voice a dead, hollow thing, do not accept you, Lucien Drax, as my mate. A stunned silence. She pushed on before her courage could fail. I reject this bond. I sever this claim. I release you. The final word was a death sentence. The moment it left her lips, something inside her chest snapped. It was a physical sensation, a searing, violent tearing as the nascent mate bond was ripped apart. An agony unlike anything she had ever known stole her breath, a cold, soul-deep emptiness rushing in to fill the void. She staggered, a cry of pure pain tearing from her throat. But her suffering was nothing. Nothing compared to his. Lucien let out a choked, guttural sound, his hands flying to his chest. The golden light in his eyes flickered, sputtered, and died. He threw his head back and howled, a sound of such profound, animalistic agony that the very stones seemed to tremble. It was the sound of a soul breaking. Then, he collapsed, his powerful body hitting the floor. The man was gone. Only a broken, twitching beast remained. Chapter 19, An Echo of a Bond. The great hall was a maelstrom of panic and confusion. Lucien's warriors stood frozen, there. Alpha on the floor, no longer a king but a twitching vessel of feral agony. Annie remained where she stood, the architect of this ruin, drowning in an icy sea of her own making. Her gambit to save him had been a fool's errand, a child's solution to a problem she couldn't comprehend. She had not cut a chain, she had severed his soul. Through the chaos, a figure moved with calm purpose. Elara, the pack's oldest healer, knelt beside Lucien, her wrinkled hands hovering over his still form. She looked up, her ancient, knowing eyes finding Annie in the crowd. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the noise like a shard of glass. "You did not free him, child," Elara said, her words a condemnation and an explanation. "You ripped his anchor from the world. The man is gone, lost in the storm of the beast. All that remains is the mindless rage, and it will devour what's left of him until his heart stops." A wave of fresh despair washed over Annie. "Then it's over," she choked out. "I've killed him." "No," the healer countered, her gaze sharp, insistent. "You have left an echo. The bond is not dead, merely broken. It can be forged again, stronger than before. But it must be done willingly. Completely. Only the true anchor can call the man home from the storm." She gestured to Lucien's unmoving form. "He is lost, child. And only you can find him." A tiny, impossible flicker of hope ignited in the wreckage of Annie's soul. Chapter 20, The Collector's Trap. Before Annie could even process the healer's words, the power vacuum in the hall was filled. Theron stepped forward, his face a mask of solemn authority. "Our Alpha has fallen," he announced, his voice ringing with false sorrow. "His mind, compromised by this bond, has collapsed. For the good of the pack, the Council must take control." It was a coup, swift and brutally efficient. Warriors loyal to Theron moved through the crowd, their expressions hard. Two of them seized Elara, while another pair grabbed Annie, their grips like iron. They were not gentle. This was not a protective custody. This was an arrest. They dragged her from the hall as another group carefully lifted Lucien's comatose body onto a stretcher. She was thrown into a dark, windowless cell deep in the fortress dungeons. Hours later, Theron appeared, a single lantern painting his face in sinister shadows. He smiled, a chilling expression, devoid of any warmth. "Such a tragedy," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "He was so powerful. But a powerful weapon with no master is a useless thing, don't you agree?" The truth of his plan crashed down on her with sickening force. He never wanted Lucien dead. He wanted him broken. Feral. A mindless beast he could point and control. "You," she whispered in horror. "Me," he confirmed, his smile widening. "And you, my dear, are the key. Your blood isn't just an Anchor. It's a leash. And with it, I will not only control him. I will control an army. Chapter 21, The Feral King's Return. She was dragged from the cell to a place of cold stone and old magic. A ritual chamber. Annie was bound spread-eagled to a flat, icy altar, the silver manacles burning her skin. Across the room, Lucien lay within a heavily reinforced cage, still lost in the coma of his broken soul, a low, constant growl rattling in his chest. Theron prepared his instruments, a silver bowl, strange herbs, and a long, obsidian knife. His intention was clear. He was going to bleed her, to use her very life force to create his monstrous puppet. Fear, cold and absolute, coiled in her gut. She closed her eyes, not in surrender, but in a final, desperate plea. She reached out with her mind, pouring all her will, all her regret, all her shattered love down the phantom limb of their broken bond. Lucien. I'm here. I'm sorry. Find me. At first, nothing. Then, a flicker. A distant echo of rage answering her terror. In the cage, the low growl deepened. Theron approached her, the obsidian blade raised, its polished surface reflecting the terror in her eyes. As the knife's icy tip touched her skin, her silent scream of pure panic shot across the bond like a bolt of lightning. And the feral king answered. A roar of pure, world-breaking fury erupted from the cage. Not a sound of pain, but of awakening. The iron bars groaned, bent, and then exploded outward. Lucien was on his feet. But it was not Lucien. It was a thing of pure, untamed power, its golden eyes burning with a mindless, indiscriminate rage. It was awake. It was free. And it was going to kill everyone in the room. Chapter 22, To be worthless for you. Chaos was king. The feral Lucien was a maelstrom of claws and fury, a mindless engine of destruction. He ripped through Theron's loyalists and his own warriors with equal, impartial savagery. Theron, his face pale with terror, saw his ultimate weapon turned against him. His plan had not just failed, it had created a monster that would consume them all. The beast that was Lucien cornered a young warrior, one of his own elite guard, and raised a clawed hand for the killing blow. In that instant, Annie, who had shattered her silver manacles on the edge of the stone altar, saw her path. It was not a choice. It was a certainty. She ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold floor, and threw herself between the beast and its victim. She stood before him, small and fragile, and met the mindless rage in his burning eyes without flinching. This was not the man she loved. This was the storm he had fought so hard to contain. And a storm needed an eye. A center. An anchor. She had tried to save him by cutting him loose, a fool's gambit born of shame. Now, she would save him by binding herself to him completely. She tilted her head back, baring the pale, vulnerable skin of her throat. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a clear, unwavering whisper that cut through the chaos. If I am worthless, she said, her soul in her eyes, then let me be worthless for you. The words were a key. A command. An act of absolute surrender and ultimate acceptance. The feral light in his eyes flickered. The bond, severed and broken, ignited between them, a white-hot torrent of power and recognition. Clarity dawned in his gaze. The man returned. And together, they turned to face their true enemy. Chapter 23, A Piece of the Soul. Theron, seeing his gambit destroyed, let out a desperate, enraged scream. While Lucien's attention was fixed on the guards he now recognized as traitors, the disgraced elder lunged, not for the Alpha, but for the anchor who had brought him back. A searing, white-hot pain exploded in Annie's side. She looked down to see the hilt of Theron's obsidian knife protruding from her ribs. Her legs gave way, the world dissolving into a gray, fuzzy haze. The last thing she heard as consciousness fled was Lucien's roar, a sound of such profound agony and rage it seemed to shake the world. She was dying. She could feel the warmth leaving her, a peaceful, drifting sensation. But Lucien would not allow it. As she floated in the quiet darkness, a new warmth bloomed in her chest. It was golden, tasting of pine and lightning and a love so fierce it was a physical force. She felt him pouring something of himself into her, not just his energy, but a piece of his very soul, his wolf's immortal strength. It was a forbidden, sacrificial magic, a power that would leave him permanently diminished. He was trading a piece of his legendary dominance, his peak alpha strength, not for a kingdom or for power, but for her. The golden light stitched her torn flesh back together, relit the fading fire in her spirit, and bound them together on a level far deeper than a simple mate bond. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was his face, his golden eyes bright with unshed tears. He was whole, and so was she. But she could feel the subtle shift in him, the quiet sacrifice he had made. He had given up a part of his crown to save his queen. Chapter 24, The Salvation Queen. Weeks later, they stood before her father's grave. The crude marker had been replaced by a noble headstone of polished granite, his true story of sacrifice now known and honored by all. The air was cool and smelled of night-blooming jasmine. A full-blood moon hung in the sky, bathing the clearing in an ethereal, silver-red light. Both packs, what remained of hers and all of his, stood in a silent, respectful circle around them. There was no more hostility, only a shared, solemn reverence. Lucien turned to her, his hands gently cupping her face. The raw power in him felt different now, just as strong, but tempered, anchored, no longer at war with itself. He died so that you might live, Annalise, Lucien murmured, his voice soft with an emotion she had once thought him incapable of. Tonight, we honor him. We honor you. He lowered his head and, with a tenderness that belied the sharpness of his teeth, he marked her. The bite was a brief, ecstatic pain, a brand of love and belonging that erased all the old scars of worthlessness. A wave of pure, unadulterated joy flowed between them, the bond now a complete and perfect thing. He raised his head, a single drop of her blood on his lips, and turned to face the assembled wolves. His voice rang with the absolute authority of a king, clear and unwavering. You were told she was worthless, he declared, his gaze sweeping over every face. You were wrong. He pulled her tight against his side, his eyes finding hers, full of fierce adoration. She is my salvation. And as one, the two packs knelt. The girl who had once knelt in the mud, scorned and alone, now stood as a queen,